Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.
Oh, it is really great to be here for this one.
You know, we usually think of religion and psychoanalysis in the same sentence as well, basically a cage match.
Right, a total brawl. Science versus faith.
Exactly, logic versus superstition or Freud versus God.
That is the traditional battlefield.
Yeah, and usually everyone leaves that fight with a bloody nose and frankly nothing learned.
But what if I told you the battle lines are drawn in the completely wrong place? What if the question isn't, do you believe in God? But rather, which God or which idol do you actually worship, even if you strictly call yourself an atheist?
See, that is a much more uncomfortable question because it completely removes the option of just sitting on the sidelines.
It really does. Today we are doing a deep dive into psychoanalysis and religion by the renowned social philosopher and psychoanalyst Erich Fromm. And let me tell you, this isn't a theology lesson.
No, not at all.
This is a technical analysis of the human soul.
Exactly. Fromm's argument is radical because he suggests that religion isn't just an option you can take or leave, it's inevitable. Biological almost.
Right. The real choice isn't between religion and atheism. It is between freedom and slavery, between worshiping an idol that crushes you or finding a truth that actually liberates you.
We are going to get deep into the weeds of idolatry here. We'll talk about Zen monks burning statues and why you might actually be worshiping the stock market without even realizing it. But before we dive in, if you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button. It really helps us keep these deep dives coming.
So should we start with the giants of the field? Freud and Jung.
Let's unpack that first, yeah. Because usually you are either Team Freud or Team Jung when you get into this stuff. They are the absolute godfathers here.
Right, and Fromm finds them both brilliant, obviously, but he thinks they both slightly miss the mark.
How so?
Well, on one side you have Freud. For Freud, religion is essentially just a collective childhood neurosis.
Like the classic Sky Daddy theory.
In a nutshell, yes. Freud believed that humans are inherently weak and we're terrified of nature and death. We feel helpless.
Makes sense. The universe is scary.
It is. So we project this ultimate father figure onto the universe to protect us. Basically just like we relied on our real dads when we were toddlers.
So it's a coping mechanism.
A coping mechanism that we need to outgrow. Freud's entire goal was maturity. He believed in logos, reason, and science. He thought we needed to just drop the illusion of religion so we could finally face reality.
Which makes total sense if you value raw, objective truth above comfort. Freud says religion is a sickness we need to cure. But then you have Jung who goes in the complete opposite direction.
Jung argues that the unconscious mind is inherently religious.
Inherently.
Yes. To Jung, if a religious idea exists in the human psyche, then it is quote-unquote psychologically true. It doesn't actually matter if it is factually true in the outside physical world, if it influences you, if it grabs your soul, it is real.
So Freud says it is a literal neurosis, and Jung says it is a fundamental psychological truth. Where does Fromm fit into that fight?
This is where it gets really fascinating. Fromm takes what we can call a third way. He criticizes Freud for not seeing that religion can actually foster human independence and love.
Okay.
But he also criticizes Jung for promoting a kind of dangerous relativism.
Wait, relativism. What does he mean by that?
Well, think about it. If truth is just whatever you personally experience inside your head, then there is no objective standard anymore.
Oh, I see.
If a dictator feels divine and his followers genuinely feel he is divine, is that true? Just because they experience it.
Right, that's a huge problem. You can't just say every deeply felt belief is valid.
Exactly. Fromm argues we have to look behind the actual doctrines. He's not interested in the dogma at all. He is interested in the human reality behind the religion.
The psychological reality.
Yes. Does this specific belief system make you stronger, freer, and more capable of love? Or does it crush you and just make you completely obedient to some arbitrary power?
And this leads us to what I think is easily the biggest aha moment of the whole source text, from Fromm's actual definition of religion, because he completely throws out the whole believing in a supernatural creator thing.
He broadens the scope entirely. Let me quote from Fromm's definition directly. He says, religion is any system of thought and action shared by a group which gives the individual a frame of orientation and an object of devotion.
A frame of orientation and an object of devotion. I mean, when you put it that way.
There is no such thing as a non-religious person.
Literally none. Everyone has that.
Precisely. Fromm argues this need is strictly biological and psychological. As humans, we are uniquely self-aware. We know we are going to die. We are painfully separated from nature.
We can't just operate on pure instinct like a sheep or a tiger.
Right. We need a map, We need some way to make sense of the world around us, and we desperately need something to dedicate our energy to.
So let's look at the self-proclaimed atheist for a second. The guy who, mocks people for going to church on Sunday. But he spends 18 hours a day working to become the CEO. He is obsessed with the stock market. He checks his portfolio every morning like it is a holy text.
From Fromm would say that is absolutely his religion. He has a frame of orientation, the market economy, and he has an object of devotion, success, and money.
He's just as religious as a medieval monk.
Exactly. He just worships a completely different God.
Fromm calls this secular religion or modern idolatry. And some of the examples he gives are really striking because we see them every single day in our culture, but we never call them religious.
Take ancestor worship, for example. In primitive cultures, you literally build a shrine to your grandfather and pray to it.
Right.
But Fromm describes a modern woman who, after her father died, essentially buried herself entirely in his memory. She couldn't form new relationships. She lived only to preserve his image and his approval.
Wow.
Psychologically speaking, she was practicing ancestor worship. It was the exact same mechanism.
Or what about totemism? Because when you hear totemism, you usually think of tribes dancing around a carved wooden pole.
But look at the modern state. Look at aggressive nationalism. When a person says, my country, right or wrong, or when they treat a literal flag not as the symbol, but as a sacred object that cannot be questioned under any circumstances, that is totemism.
You are worshiping the tribe itself.
You are finding your ultimate safety in belonging to the group rather than in your own individual integrity.
And then there's ritualism, too.
Right, like obsessive cleanliness or strict daily routines we do just to ward off anxiety. From Bohm argues that modern society is very often just a thin veneer of monotheism painted over a reality of primitive idolatry.
So we claim to worship a God of love, but our actual actions are totally different.
Yes. Our actual anxiety and our real devotion are directed at power or the state or public opinion.
We aren't secular at all. We are just idolaters wearing business suits.
That is a harsh way to put it, but it perfectly captures Fromm's points.
This really sets up the central conflict of the book. It is not about theism versus atheism. It is about the specific type of religion you practice. Fromm divides them into two main categories: authoritarian religion and humanistic religion. Let's unpack the authoritarian side first.
This is the type of religion that most people rebel against. And frankly, it's what most atheists think all religion is.
The oppressive stuff.
Exactly. In authoritarian religion, the core definition is simply submission. You submit to a power simply because it is powerful, not because it is actually good.
The classic might makes right theology.
Right. The dynamic is essentially this: God owns absolutely everything and man owns absolutely nothing. God is all-powerful, man is completely powerless, God is all-wise, man is stupid and fundamentally sinful.
It sounds like a deeply toxic relationship.
It is a profoundly masochistic relationship. Fromm explains the psychological mechanism going on here. The individual feels incredibly weak and isolated in the world.
So how do they cope?
To cope, they take all of their own best qualities, their reason, their capacity for love, their inner strength, and they project all of it onto this external God figure.
Give it all away.
They empty themselves out. Then they basically beg to get a tiny little bit of it back through grace.
So the more perfect and powerful God becomes in this system, the more empty and pathetic the human becomes.
Yes. From Cluns points to Calvin's theology as a prime historical example of this. The core idea that you must completely despise yourself in order to truly glorify God. If you have any personal pride or autonomy, you are essentially stealing glory from God.
That just sounds psychologically exhausting. But then Fromm contrasts this with humanistic religion. And this really surprised me because he isn't just talking about secular humanism here. He sees this humanistic religion existing within actual traditional religious frameworks.
He does. In humanistic religion, God is not a terrifying power standing over man. God is a symbol of man's own highest powers and potential.
Wait, so in humanistic religion, God is basically a mirror of what we could theoretically become.
In a psychological sense, yes. The ultimate goal is self-realization, not blind obedience. Faith isn't just believing something because an authority figure told you to. Faith is having certainty in your own rational conviction.
And the overall mood is completely different, right?
The prevailing mood isn't guilt or sorrow, like in the authoritarian model. It's joy.
Fromm pulls some absolutely incredible examples from history to prove this exists within major religious traditions. I love this story he shared about early Buddhism with the Buddha and the hare.
Yes. That is a perfect illustration of faith based on reason versus faith based on fear.
So for those of you listening, let me set this up. There is a hare sleeping under a mango tree.
A classic fable setup.
Yeah. Suddenly, a mango falls and makes a massive, loud thud on the ground. The hare wakes up terrified and is totally convinced the earth is cracking apart.
He thinks it's the end of the world.
So he starts running. Other hares see him sprinting for his life and ask what's wrong. He screams that the world is ending, so they panic and start running too.
Contagion.
Exactly. Then the deer start running, then the boars, and soon the entire animal kingdom is in a massive blind stampede.
Total mass hysteria driven entirely by the rumor mill.
Right. Then the Buddha shows up. He stops the stampede and asks who actually saw the world ending. The deer point back to the boars point to the hares, and eventually they all point back to that very first hare.
And notice what the Buddha does next. He doesn't just use his authority.
He doesn't just say, I am the Buddha, stop being ridiculous. He says, let's go look. He takes that hare all the way back to the tree, points to the fallen mango, and rationally proves that the earth is perfectly fine.
The key point here is that the Buddha demanded rational investigation from his followers. That is the core of humanistic religion. It respects the human mind. It absolutely does not ask you to shut off your brain and just blindly obey.
There was another example used from the Zen Buddhism tradition that was pretty shocking. The monk who literally burns the holy statue.
Yes, the story of the monk Tanka. It is the dead of winter, it is absolutely freezing outside, and he is staying in a temple. He takes a sacred wooden statue of the Buddha, chops it up with an axe, and starts a fire, just to stay warm.
Which I can only imagine did not go over very well with the local temple staff.
The head priest is completely horrified. He yells at him, "How dare you burn the holy statue? That is the Buddha!"
And what does Tanka do?
Tanka just starts calmly poking through the ashes with a stick. He says, "I am looking for sorry, holy relics." The priest is furious and says, "It is just wood. There are no holy relics in
I
there."
love this part.
And Tanka replies, "Well, if there are no relics, then it is obviously just wood. So can I have the other two statues for the fire?"
That is incredibly bold.
It is the ultimate rejection of idolatry. The symbol is not the reality. If the statue doesn't serve human life, like keeping a freezing man from dying of hypothermia, it's just a piece of wood. True religion is about the reality of enlightenment, not worshiping the physical object itself.
Fromman also dives into the Jewish tradition, which I found really surprising, honestly, because you usually think of the Old Testament as very authoritarian. Lots of strict rules, lightning bolts, obey or get smitten.
And Fromman readily acknowledges that authoritarian streak is definitely there in the texts. But he points out this incredibly strong undercurrent of humanism that runs parallel to it. There is a famous story from the Talmud about Rabbi Elazar.
Oh, right. He is arguing a point of law against all the other sages.
Exactly. He is completely convinced he is right, but the majority outvotes him.
So he pulls out the big guns.
He resorts to literal miracles. He says, "If I am right, let this carob tree move." And the tree rips out of the ground and moves 100 yards.
But the other sages don't care.
Right, they say trees don't prove logic, so he makes the local river flow backward. They say rivers don't prove logic either. Finally, a literal voice from heaven booms down from the sky and says, "Why are you arguing with Elazar? He is right."
I mean, if God himself chimes in, surely the debate is over, right? God literally cast the deciding vote.
You would naturally think so. But the sages actually stand up and quote scripture back to God. They say the law is not in heaven.
Meaning what exactly?
Meaning, once the law was given to humanity, it belongs to humanity. We interpret it with our own human reason. And the most beautiful part is how the story ends. It ends with God smiling and saying, "My children have defeated me."
My children have defeated me. That is such a profoundly humanistic image. It is like a parent who is genuinely proud that their children have finally grown up and can think for themselves, rather than a cosmic tyrant demanding endless submission.
Exactly. That is the pure essence of humanistic religion. Man's reason and autonomy are fundamentally respected even by God.
So this brings us to the real elephant in the room here, the word God itself. Fromman seems to think the word has basically become a massive problem for us today.
He really does. He argues that for theists, the word God has actually become an idol. It has become a fixed thing you possess. Like, I have God on my side and you don't.
A piece of property, almost.
Yes. And for atheists, the word is just an automatic trigger for denial and hostility. But Fromm says the real fight of our era isn't between God and no God.
It's between idolatry and humanism.
Precisely. It is between worshiping dead things and arbitrary power versus worshiping actual love and truth.
So you could technically be an outspoken atheist, but live a life dedicated to love, truth, and reason, and Fromm would categorize that as practicing humanistic religion.
Yes, he would. And
Hmm.
conversely, you can be a devout believer who goes to church every single Sunday. But if your actual life is devoted to chasing power, status, and submitting to the state, you are practicing pure authoritarian idolatry.
There's this beautiful linguistic analysis from gives of the name of God in the Hebrew Bible when Moses is at the burning bush and he asks God, "Who are you?"
Right, the translation we usually hear in English is, I am that I am.
Which sounds very static, like a fixed object. I am the existing one.
But from notes, the original Hebrew phrase is Eheya Asher Ehai. This is a much better translation of the verb tense there is, I am becoming that which I am becoming.
I am becoming.
It implies a continuous process. God is not a fixed thing. You can't name a living process the same way you name a wooden table or a dog.
Because giving it a name fixes it as an object.
Exactly. And a nameless infinite process cannot be turned into an idol. Vrumquam quotes the medieval mystic Meister Eckhart, who said, "He who speaks of God does not know God."
Because the very moment you put a neat little label on it, you have made it small enough to fit in your pocket. You have successfully turned the infinite into a manageable idol.
Precisely. You limit the unlimited just to make yourself feel safe.
So where does psychoanalysis actually fit into all of this? Because if religion, at least the humanistic kind, is ultimately about pursuing truth and love, well, isn't that what going to therapy is supposed to be about?
Francoeur argues that true psychoanalysis is basically the physician of the soul. But he draws a very sharp distinction between two entirely different types of therapy. And this critique is honestly more relevant today than it was when he wrote it.
He talks about adjustment therapy first.
Right. Adjustment therapy is strictly about helping the patient fit into the existing society. From Grimlow calls this the marketing orientation.
Marketing orientation.
Yeah. So if you go to the doctor and you are unhappy because you aren't selling yourself well on the modern personality market, the doctor just helps you improve your sales pitch.
So the patient says, "Doc, I am depressed because I am not successful at my corporate job." And the doctor says, "Well, here are some coping mechanisms so you can be more successful and stop being depressed."
Exactly. It completely validates the underlying sickness of the society itself. It assumes the ultimate goal of human life is just to be a well-oiled cog in the social machine. Fromely totally rejects this approach.
He believes in what he calls the cure of the soul.
Yes. In The Cure of the Soul, the goal isn't just about removing uncomfortable symptoms, like getting rid of a headache or a social phobia so you can go back to work.
It goes much deeper than that.
It's about helping the patient gain true independence, deep personal integrity, and most importantly, the actual capacity to love. It is about systematically clearing away all the comforting lies we tell ourselves every day so we can finally see the truth.
In this view, the psychoanalyst functions almost like a secular priest.
In the absolute best sense of that word, yes. The analyst helps the patient distinguish between the authoritarian conscience, which is really just the internalized voice of your parents or society constantly yelling, obey, and the humanistic conscience.
Which is the voice of your own true self.
Your core integrity, yeah.
Foliton points out this great line, "The truth shall set you free," which is obviously from the Bible, but he says it is also the fundamental motto of psychoanalysis.
It is the exact same mission.
Yeah.
And Fortam completely redefines the concept of sin in this psychological context, too.
Right, because usually sin means breaking a cosmic rule.
But in humanistic analysis, sin isn't offending some angry deity in the sky. Sin is fundamentally sinning against yourself.
Wasting your own life.
Yes, it is wasting your unique potential. It is failing to love when you had the chance. It is choosing to stay a frightened child when you have the capacity to become an independent adult.
That really hits home. It's not about fearing punishment for breaking a rule. It is about breaking your own internal integrity.
And that creates a very specific kind of guilt, not the childish guilt of, oh no, dad is mad at me. It creates the heavy existential guilt of knowing deep down that you are wasting your one precious life.
So what does this all mean for us at the end of the day? We have looked at Freud and Jung, we've talked about modern idols, Zen monks burning statues, and the true meaning of the name of God.
I think the grand synthesis of Fromm's work here is this. Religion isn't actually about the specific label printed on the jar. It doesn't matter if the label says Christian, Jewish, Buddhist, or atheist.
It is entirely about the actual contents inside the jar.
Yes. It is about your underlying human attitude toward reality.
Are you operating your life out of a place of submission and powerlessness? Or are you operating out of a place of love, reason, and independence?
Fromm really warns us that the greatest danger we face today isn't that science is going to destroy religion. The real danger is that this pervasive marketing orientation is going to completely destroy the human soul.
We are voluntarily turning ourselves into commodities.
Exactly. We worship the machine, we worship the state, we worship financial success above all else.
We look around and we think we are so incredibly advanced just because we don't literally bow down to golden calves anymore. We think we are highly rational atheists or wonderfully enlightened believers.
But if we bow down to the market or to public opinion, if we are willingly sacrificing our own integrity just to feel safe or to be accepted by the crowd, are we actually any different at all?
That is the exact provocative thought I want to leave everyone with today, because if you were listening to this, you might think, none of this applies to you. We look back at ancient people who were terrified of thunder gods and we smile and think, oh, how primitive. But if you are terrified of your social media feed, or if you modify your entire personality just to fit into a corporate culture that you secretly hate, well, who is the primitive one?
It really forces you to ask the question, have we actually outgrown idolatry, or have we just made our idols invisible?
A massive thank you to our expert for walking us through this incredible deep dive into Erich Fromm's psychoanalysis and religion. It is a dense piece of source material, but man, does it completely change how you look at the modern world.
It's an absolute pleasure to unpack it with you.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.